Skyward Sword, the first game in the timeline, was the game that chronologically first introduced time travel in Hyrule, through the use of the Gates of Time. Two massive gear-like portals found within a sealed temple in the Faron region, and a Temple of Time of Lanayru Desert. These portals, created by goddess Hylia, allowed the user to traverse back and forth through time, being able to visit eras long past and even change the course of history. To say that time travel in Skyward Sword is confusing would be an understatement, and I'll explain why. But before I do, we first must recap key events of Skyward Sword's history to understand the impossibilities of this game's time travel. Thousands of years before the game's events, goddess Hylia was tasked by the old gods to watch over the divine relic, the Triforce, before departing to the heavens. Not long after, a great war sparked between goddess Hylia and the demon king Demise, an ancient demon who rose from a fissure in the earth to lay siege to the land in hopes of claiming the almighty power left in the care of the goddess. To protect the humans from the grasp of Demise and his hordes, Hylia gathered them onto an outcropping of land and raised it high above the clouds, out of the reach of the demon king, hiding the Triforce within a hidden structure known as the Sky Keep under the enormous statue of the goddess. After a fearsome battle, Demise was defeated and sealed away by the goddess within the pit that remained from the elevated plot of land, which would come to be known in time as the Sealed Grounds. But Hylia, fatally wounded, and knowing Demise would break free from his seal one day, renounced her divine form to be able to wield the Triforce against the Demon King, its use limited exclusively to mortals by decree of the Golden Goddesses. Hylia reincarnated as Zelda, the daughter of Gaepora, on the floating lands of Skyloft, the blood of the goddess flowing through her veins. During the events of Skyward Sword, Zelda, Link's childhood friend, was dragged down to the surface by a black tornado conjured by the Demon Lord Girhim, a loyal servant of Demise, who wished to use Zelda's soul to resurrect his fallen master. After traversing the three regions of the surface on his quest to reunite with Zelda, Link finally caught up with Zelda and Impa, her Sheikah protector and guide, in front of the Gate of Time of Lanayru Desert's Temple of Time. It is here that Girhim ambushed them in a ferocious attack, attempting to kidnap Zelda to fulfill his demonic plans. However, with no time to spare, Impa held off Girhim until Link stepped in, giving Zelda and Impa time to escape to the past through the Gate of Time, destroying the portal in the process. After Link forged the Master Sword by imbuing the blade with the sacred flames of the Golden Goddesses, Link reactivated the Gate of Time of the Sealed Temple and traveled to the past, to the time when Hylia had recently sealed away Demise and renounced her divinity, to meet with Zelda once again. But their reunion was cut short, as Zelda, having restored her full memories of her past life as a goddess by praying to the goddess statues of the Skyview and Earth Springs, sealed herself within a crystal cocoon to maintain the seal of Demise in a sleep that would last for thousands of years. In the present, from the moment that Link first landed in the Sealed Grounds, if we look through the large doors behind the Gate of Time, we would catch a glimpse of the crystal that Zelda was sealed in the distant past. This meant that Zelda not only was sealed within a crystal since ancient times, but also was born and raised in Skyloft simultaneously, meaning two Zeldas existed at the same time. When Link obtained the Triforce from the Sky Keep and wished for the destruction of Demise, the Isle of the Goddess that floated high above the Sealed Grounds crashed down back to its original location, crushing the imprisoned as it broke free from his seal once again, eradicating the beast once and for all. With Demise no longer being a threat to the world, Zelda's purpose to maintain its seal came to an end, and thus broke free from the crystal that kept her in stasis. When peace seemed to be restored to the land, Girahim appeared out of nowhere and took Zelda with him through the Gate of Time. As with demise destroyed in the present, his only way to resurrect his master was by doing so in the past. In the Temple of Hylia, when Link followed Girahim back in time, the great doors were still closed, meaning Zelda, who traveled back in time with Impa through the Gate of Time on Lanayru Desert, was still inside, sealed away within her crystal to maintain the seal of demise. This means that when Girahim took Zelda back to the past to revive demise, Zelda was also sealed inside the crystal behind the massive doors, meaning there was now two Zeldas in the past. Keep this in mind, it will come to be important very soon. As mentioned earlier, when Link wished for the destruction of demise to the Triforce, the Isle of the Goddess crashed down to the sealed grounds, destroying the imprisoned as it attempted to break free from its seal. With demise destroyed, Zelda's divine purpose to maintain its seal was no longer needed, and thus she broke free from her crystal. In the past, however, Link successfully defeated Demise, the original form of the imprisoned, and sealed him away within the Master Sword. With Demise destroying the past, there would be no need to maintain the seal of the Demon King any longer, and thus Zelda will break free from her crystal just like she did in the present. Remember when I told you to keep in mind the sealed doors with Zelda inside? Take a look at the great doors of the Temple of Hylia after the defeat of Demise. Notice anything different? The doors are now open, and the crystal cocoon containing Zelda is nowhere to be found. So where did she go? If Zelda broke free from her crystal in the past, then, theoretically, we wouldn't see her in the future from the beginning of the game, right? It is here that things begin to get complicated. If Zelda broke free from her crystal in the past after Demise was defeated, she would not be there to break free in the present, which would mean Girahim would not be able to take Zelda back to the past to revive Demise, and Zelda will not break free from her seal, basically destroying that timeline. This, however, brings another big question to the table. If Demise was destroyed in the past and sealed within the Master Sword, which was left to rest within the Temple of Hylia, the imprisoned shouldn't exist in the sealed grounds in the present. The events of the past were changed so drastically that the only possible way for this to make sense would be if a timeline split took place. A timeline where, by destroying Demise and sealing his residual consciousness within the Master Sword, the future would not have the imprisoned to worry about. This would have been a very easy way to explain why the Master Sword is seen in the Sealed Temple, despite not being seen throughout the entire game, unlike Zelda, who was sealed in the past and could be seen behind the great doors of the Sealed Temple from the moment Link first descended to the surface. However, the ending of Skyward Sword proves in many ways that when Zelda, Link, and Groose returned back to the present, they returned back to their own time, not a different timeline, and yet there are elements that simply should not exist in the future, judging by the events of the past. Demise was destroyed in the past and sealed within the Master Sword, which was left to rest within a pedestal of the Temple of Hylia, remaining there for thousands of years, as seen when Link, Zelda, and Groose returned back to the present to the Sealed Temple, where the Master Sword remained untouched. However, as Demise was sealed within the Master Sword, he would not exist as the imprisoned in the sealed grounds, which would not require Link to find the Triforce to wish for the destruction of the imprisoned. Yet, for some reason, the Isle of the Goddess that dropped from the sky due to Link's wish, which destroyed the imprisoned in the present, is also in the surface alongside the Master Sword, This would mean that the mice not only existed as the imprisoned within the sealed grounds, but he was also sealed away within the Master Sword in the distant past. As you can probably tell, this is simply impossible. But we also know that this is the original timeline, as Zelda's father and Groos's friends descended from Skyloft to meet them, Zelda and her father reuniting again after their long time apart following her abduction. To make things even more confusing, Zelda gave Impa her bracelet in the past as a means for Impa to remember her, which she can be seen wearing as an old lady throughout all of Skyward Sword. And this event happened after Link placed the Master Sword in the pedestal. The Master Sword should have been in the sealed grounds all this time in Skyward Sword, but it wasn't. This should be a timeline split through and through, yet they returned to their own future with elements from the altered past that shouldn't be there at all. So when I explained earlier that Zelda shouldn't exist in the past if she broke out of the crystal, Skyward Sword would somehow still have Zelda be sealed away within her crystal cocoon in the present. This to me seems as if a timeline split was created that later converged into one, where the result would have two demises sealed away in the present, one within the sealed grounds which was later destroyed, and another in the Master Sword. This is why I believe that Skyward Sword caused a dragon break. The term dragon break comes from the Elder Scrolls games by Bethesda. A dragon break is a temporal phenomenon that involves a splitting of the natural timeline, which results in branching parallel realities where the same events occur differently or not at all. At the end of a dragon break, the timeline reconnects, making all possibilities and outcomes truth, though contradictory to each other. Essentially, a dragon break is a timeline convergence, multiple timelines coming together into a singular timeline, where events from those timelines all took place in this newly converged timeline, regardless of how contradicting those events are from one another. A dragon break would explain the impossibilities found at the end of Skyward Sword perfectly. However, one question remains. How would that happen? We've seen the timeline split many times throughout the series, but a timeline convergence? What would cause the timelines to merge into one? If we are to uncover the reasoning behind this confusing mystery, we must first move to another point in the timeline. After Skyward Sword, the memory of Hylia seemed to fade into legend, with no other game after making any reference to the Divine Goddess. The descendants of Hylia's incarnation, Zelda, in whose veins flowed the blood of the goddess, became the founders and rulers of the Kingdom of Hyrule. However, in Breath of the Wild, not only was Hylia referenced directly by several people of the land, but the statues of the goddess returned to Hyrule in greater numbers than seen in Skyward Sword, being found in all villages of Hyrule, as well as the several springs found across the land. As mentioned before, Hylia renounced her divinity in the distant past, following her confrontation with the Demon King Demise, reincarnating as Zelda, whose descendants will continue to carry the divine blood of the goddess Hylia. This sacrifice is known by all in the time of Breath of the Wild, as Zelda is described multiple times, as well as her distant ancestor of 10,000 years prior, as the princess who carries the blood of the goddess. Despite knowing of this truth, they still pray to Goddess Hylia across the land of Hyrule, which should be futile if Hylia no longer exists as a deity in the land. After all, they could perfectly be praying to the three golden goddesses who created Hyrule, like the Hylians did in every other game of the series. Yet they pray to Hylia and worship the old gods as well. But, despite this, something quite peculiar happens in Breath of the Wild that shouldn't, judging by what we have gone over thus far. When Link prays to any of the statues of Hylia and Hyrule, a bright light shines over the hero as he hears a distant voice speaking to him, the voice of Goddess Hylia herself. This, considering all we've established thus far, shouldn't be possible, as Hylia renounced her divinity and became a mortal in Zelda. But what if I told you that Hylia's return in Breath of the Wild is not only possible, but dates back to before the events of Skyward Sword? Remember how Zelda and her sealing crystal mysteriously disappeared in the past after the defeat of the mice? As we've established earlier, Zelda would have broken free from her crystal in the past following the defeat of the mice, just like how she broke free from her crystal in the present after the eradication of the imprisoned. But where did she go? For starters, Zelda would simultaneously be in the past and the present. It is only logical that the Zelda of the past would not travel to the future, as the present already had a Zelda of its own, and two Zeldas shouldn't exist in one time. However, Zelda would still be born in Skyloft in the future, with the Zelda that was once sealed within the crystal now free in the past. This is why I proposed the idea that the Zelda of the past somehow returned back to her divine form, to the form of Goddess Hylia. How this happens is beyond me. Perhaps Hylia has some unknown plan to revert back to her divine form. After all, we know that Hylia has a proclivity to create very complicated plans. But if that were the case, Hylia and Zelda would exist simultaneously in the present, and it would explain why Link heard the voice of Goddess Hylia while praying to the goddess statues in Breath of the Wild. If Hylia returned to her divine form, and considering that she created the Gates of Time, which allowed the user to travel in time at will, it is likely that she was the one who merged the timelines, the person behind the Dragon Break. The reason as to why she would do this would be to not only preserve the defeat of the mice in the past of all timelines, but also to ensure Link, Zelda, and Groose return back to their own time and not an alternate timeline created by their actions in the past. This is further supported by the fact that the mice is described to be a being that has conquered time itself. Hylia would ensure that his defeat in all timelines is absolute. This would result in the outcome we see in Skyward Sword. The mice would have been sealed twice in this conjoined history. The Master Sword, forged from the Goddess Sword, which will no longer exist in the present, unlike in the past where it still rested within the goddess statue in Skyloft, would be placed in its pedestal, holding the residual consciousness of the mice, while the imprisoned, who was sealed with the sealing spike in the sealed grounds, was eradicated by Link's wish to the Triforce, which returned the Isle of the Goddess back to the sealing grounds. Link, Zelda, and Groose would return back to their own time, the Gate of Time dissolving into nothingness so as to not be used ever again, perhaps by the hands of the now revived Goddess Hylia. The trio of heroes would be unaware that the timelines were now converged, something which also happens in the Elder Scrolls games with their Dragon Breaks, where the characters have no recollection of the timeline convergence. After Impa's death, and the reunion of Zelda's father and Groose's friends, Groose would return back to the sky with them, and Link would remain in the surface with Zelda to watch over the Triforce, which would lead to the Zelda series as we know it. What do you think of this theory? Please let me know in the comments below and share with me your thoughts on this time travel complication. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get notified of future uploads. Also, consider following me on Twitter and Instagram to stay in touch. This has been Solo Lore, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.